I'll hear something and I'll show it to Margaret, my wife and partner. She's amazing at this. She can look at things as a fan and a masterful musician, but she'll hear something and I'll say, well, I can't tell if I like it because this is this and they do that and blah blah blah. And she'll just be like, it's terrible. And I'll be like, yeah, that's the word I was going for, And it's not to be mean, it's not at all that, or it's amazing. The point is that your gut knows until you can also analyze with your gut.
I'm Adam Levy, and that, of course, is the wise and thoughtful guitarist Julian Lage. This is from a conversation that he and I recently had about his new record, which is called Speak to Me. I asked him about his approach to composing, and I asked him how he thinks about acoustic guitar versus electric guitar because he plays both on Speak to Me. Really juicy conversation, lots of insights. It's only about 30 minutes long, start to finish. There's no edits. You'll see the whole thing as it happened in real time. I'm curious, if you had 30 minutes with Julian Lage, what would you ask him? If you want to share that, you can put that in the comment section down below. If you are not already subscribed to this channel, to Adam Levy Guitar Tips, this would be a perfectly good time to hit the subscribe button. And thank you for that. Without any further ado, let's get back to my conversation with Julian Lage. I know you've worked with different producers on different records. Margaret Glaspie has produced for you, and Jesse Harris and Kenneth Pattingale.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what drew you to Joe Henry for Speak to Me.
Well, Joe's, magnificent, and I'm a fan of his, and I have been for a long time. My parents and I listened to him when I was young, and so he's been a part of my life in that way for a very long time. And only in the last couple years did I meet him. And when I met him, I told him that. I said, "Man, you're a big part of my life," and thanked him. And well, we hit it off great. Um, and I realized that there was, it's one of those beautiful things when you meet your heroes when they always say don't meet your heroes, but when you meet your heroes and you realize they're actually even better than you could ever imagine. That was the case with Joe. And also, I think there was a kind of sympathetic relationship that we share to music that I thought, man, I relate to him. Um,
Mm.
and so as this record was coming together, I was thinking about who I wanted to ask to produce, and just because it was something a little bit different than I was accustomed to, um, it could have gone a lot of ways, and I needed some clarity about kind of picking a direction. I thought, well, I want to go with Joe. I mean, now that we're friends and now that we had worked together on another project, I really think this is who I need to call. And I called him and I laid out the record, the desires, and with no pressure, fully prepared for him to say, well, good luck, and I hope you get someone who you like. I just kind of bite the
Yeah.
bullet. So, what do you think of this? And his
Mm.
response was, um, well, let's make it tomorrow. Like I hear you. This record needs to happen, and so it was there's such a beautiful synergy there, and it kind of carried all the way through the whole project. So um,
Mm.
I don't think there was another option really.
When you said it was coming together and it was uh, different, how was this record coming together different in your mind?
Well, there was you know an approach I've taken now for a while with records was really about instrumentation first. I want to make a trio record, and then within the trio, once you have the instrumentation, I want to focus on this side of writing or this side of interaction or what have you. Um, and then I was feeling like there was some gray areas compositionally um, that I felt spoke most when I was playing solo. Like solo guitar music where there's kind of this agency to move freely and to not feel like, okay, it's trio music or quartet, or it's just that wonderful thing that you know so well of how solo guitar can allow such agency, and emotional agency too. You can kind of have these complex emotions that somehow seem more vivid when it's solo guitar. At least to me as a player. Maybe it's just because it's unencumbered, and I can hear it and I can feel it and so, whatever. Um, so that that notion was in my mind, but at the same time, I wasn't really looking to make a solo guitar record. And the thought of having a bigger ensemble wasn't terribly attractive to me. I thought, well, I don't want to write for a bigger group. I don't want to really consider these things you have to consider. Especially if my goal is to have the freedom of a solo guitar. But and so there was this kind of catch 22, and get the freedom but have a small orchestration, or get the orchestration, lose the freedom. And I presented it as such to Joe. And this was at the stage when it's coming together, where I said I have these songs, they could kind of go either way. And he understood the nuanced implication of, like, right, the we don't want the attention to be on the soloness of it. Is there a way to have it all? Is there a way for you to write this music for solo guitar, and then incorporate the kinds of musicians that who can basically frame it, um, without meaning I had to go write a bunch of charts.
Right.
And that's where you get, Dave King and Jorge Roeder, who are the masters. They are my trio, but in this context, they're kind of like the conductors of a bigger orchestra. So again, I'm kind of resting. I'm seated in the trio, but it's not a three-way conversation the whole time. And then you have Patrick Warren and Chris Davis and Levon Henry, who are all masters at integrating into the music without ever feeling. They're not interlopers. You know what I mean? They're not walking on eggshells. They're as bold and present as Dave and Jorge.
Right.
And I think there's a symmetry there that it's almost like I've got, yeah, I kind of rest in the middle of this ensemble, kind of like a singer in a gospel ensemble or something. I feel like I'm able to retain the freedom of being myself, but I'm not really directing everyone to play a certain way. No, not at all. It's everyone just kind of folds in around. So in that respect, I think it came together well. And that's when it's saying coming together. That was the kind of big crux of what I couldn't figure out. Once that was clear that there was a path forward, kind of having her cake and eating it too, then I just wrote, 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 wrote. I just lots and lots of songs.
Mm. Mm. And then I think you were just out on the road with an ensemble version of that band,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Yeah.
So, how did the music, like, did you tend to find, okay, this is what works for this music and this ensemble, and then lean into the arrangements and dynamics that were working, or did you want to keep discovering new things every night?
It changed quite a bit night to night, I would say. We started with the template of the record, which was, challenging because the record was made very quickly, and it was just, as you know well, I mean, it was a record date. You do it and then you move on, and okay, those are the takes we got. And those weren't premeditated either. So to use it as a launch pad for the shows was, only served us so well, because the last thing I wanted to do was recreate a take from a year ago, because I'm not in the, that's it's not, I'm not there
Right.
anymore. So I do think the marching orders were like, here are the songs. They're robust. They can handle stuff. They can handle being explored. Um, but how do we do that in this case, a five-piece ensemble? Um, and it was with Rudy Royston on drums, who was wonderful, and Jorge Roeder and Levon
Oh.
Henry and Rob Berger on keyboards and organ, and a couple shows with Chris Davis. Um, so it wasn't the original band either completely. So it was its own animal. So yeah, the thought of trying to recreate it wasn't that desirable, but the thought of where can this go, and what else can the song be, and what tempo should it be tonight, and but all these things, I mean, everything was up for grabs. And there were times where it really was fine and cool, and there were times where it was amazing. And it was just the whole spread.
I love that on the record there's acoustic songs and electric songs. And one thing about your electric sound that I always like is the sense of like you could breakup is never too far away. Like your sound
Mhm.
is clean enough that all of the details come through. You can hear all of the touch things and the harmonics and all of that. But I then you lean into it and this
Mhm.
other thing happens because the amp gets excited.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's something like that on the acoustic guitar. Is there a way to lean in and get that some kind of extra thing out of the acoustic that's along the lines of what you do with your electric sound?
Wow, it's an interesting question. Absolutely. Thanks for saying that, by the way. Um, I think of it as stemming from over. I think of overdrive on the electric the way I think of overdrive on the acoustic, because I think overdrive on acoustic is very overt to me, and overdrive can be the kind of another way of saying compression. You know that if you push hard enough or play with a certain attack, the cavity of the acoustic guitar can kind of it can kind of overload, and often there's a dip in volume. You know, it's not like overdrive, like you play harder and it gets brighter and grittier. You play harder and it kind of chokes itself. And certain guitars, especially old Martins and old Gibsons, you can feel it, but you can hear it on new guitars too. Um, there's a little bit of a shift in frequency response when you're digging in, you know, it's that I'm always fond of, or so sometimes it's as simple as like you dig in and you hear just a little more overtone information from some of the other adjacent strings. But in other words, something's happening that doesn't happen when you play with a softer touch. Um, so if we look at overdrive on that kind of reductionist level, then absolutely, you can overdrive an acoustic, you can overdrive its construction in a certain way and get different artifacts and different results. And similarly, more and more with electric, I think of it the same where overdrive is not the sound of grit. It's this other, like I've been playing with this lately and I've been excited to find that even at low volumes, I can hear, um, I can play things in such a way where I hear, um, there's like a tension to the sound where the all the overtones are kind of maxed out, but you're not breaking up a speaker. Um, and it all and it, so if you listen closely, it kind of gives the effect of overdrive. Also, you know, this is hardly novel. I mean, I think if you listen to like George Barnes, like early George Barnes, you know, kind of innovator jazz guitar, an
Sure.
electric. You listen to Charlie Christian. Charlie, that's a little more misleading because there is a sound of, um, you can hear that it's a small amp and that it's working. So but there is a way of placing notes and beats and phrases where they give the effect of overdrive, whether you're actually getting a breakup or not. Um, you know, I think Sonny Rollins is a good example of that. You can have, and this comes from early, you know, tradition of tenor players. Coleman Hawkins could overdrive, you know. So it's fun when you start to look. I think of overdrive very universally and holistically, less of like um, the actual point of breakup. And that might be, you might be referring to that in a way.
Yeah, that's more what I'm talking about. Not like overdrive, but yeah, you're mentioning tenor players. If you listen even like to John Coltrane ballads, even
Oh,
when he's playing ballads,
oh
the
yeah.
completeness of the sound,
Mhm.
we wouldn't call it overdrive or distortion or
But
anything, but
but it
it's
is.
very
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, you're right. Oh, it's so I mean, to me, I think McCoy Tyner is one of the greatest examples of overdrive where it's sneaky though, because it's not just hitting it. It's not about it's if you're in one tempo and you play a whole flurry of information and then you pause and then you go back to the tempo you were playing, the density of that phrase rhythmically is kind of a rhythmic overdrive. It's kind of like you know what it is? It's kind of like when you're a kid and you or maybe you do it at any age, but you put a playing card in your bicycle wheel to I'm sure you've done that.
Yeah.
And as you speed up,
Yeah.
you get this brrrr, and it makes you feel like you have a motorcycle. That's
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
that's the impact that I'm going for. That really tactile, while it's speeding up, you're feeling it engage and kind of lock down. Um, it's a cool, man. It's really cool.
Oh, I love that because that image because then you hear that sound and also you can
You
feel
feel
the
it.
wind on your face and
Yeah,
like that's
yeah,
really vivid. That's great.
yeah, yeah. It's cool.
You were mentioning before that, at the beginning of this record there was I don't know if tension is the word, but the idea of like, okay, a solo record, but an orchestrated record.
Hmm.
And there's a song on the record, Myself Around You, which
Hmm.
really is a solo
Yeah.
guitar piece.
Mhm.
And I wanted to ask you how much of that is composed versus improvised.
Yeah.
It's a really curious piece. I've listened to it over and over.
It's a weird one. I like that tune. Thank you for listening to it. That was an improvisation a long time ago on electric guitar. Like I that was an improvisation, and then I wrote it down. But I wrote it down in this kind of it was kind of a study where um I'm pencil and paper all the time. Like I write I it's kind of how I make sense of music and writing tunes and um in that case, I noticed that okay, well, I played this thing, and it's so different than how I would be um, inclined to write with a pencil and a paper. Like there's these things that happen that are kind of irrational and polytonal and things that it's almost like you. It's I just was kind of fascinated by this recording, this voice memo I had, and so what I did is I transcribed it, but kind of in a form of shorthand, where I figured out these what's happening, almost like a Schenkerian analysis. Like, why is this hanging together? Why is what's there's not really one tonal center. There's kind of a irrational flow to it, and yet when I listened to it, I kind of couldn't take my ears off of it. I just thought, well, and what's he going to play next, and what next? It's really it's a weird architecture. Um, and so I kind of learned it um, in modified things where I thought, well, if I wanted this to last longer. I want this, I kind of did all the things that feel blasphemous, especially with improvisation where, if I could just put the original voice memo, I would, but it wasn't of the quality to put out. Um, but there was something in there where it was about kind of, I don't know, celebrating. I'm sure you know this so well. There's such a thing where, compositions are real things and improvisations are these fleeting things. And it's a beautiful thing when a player can marry the two worlds, where you kind of can't tell what's what, or their
Right.
language is equally bold. You think of Chick Corea, where it's like, the writing is just as fluid and incredible and complex as his soloing is, and Wayne Shorter, obviously, all of the greats.
Sure.
And then there are writers who write things that are amazing catalysts that don't. They're the songs don't sound anything like they're playing the way they solo per se, or not. I shouldn't say don't sound anything like them, but I think of Coltrane as a wonderful example of someone who could write, Crescent, or Love Supreme, and then but it's the interaction of or Nika's Dream. It's the interaction of the composition with their playing style that creates this bigger thing. Um,
Right. Right.
and so I
Yep.
was kind of interested in the thing of like, well, what if the playing style and the composition are just one thing? Can I kind of agree upon a song that just sounds like, yeah, which is it? And at this point, I don't remember how much is of the original and how much is modified on paper, but that was the pursuit with that song.
Are you writing all the time?
No, no, not at all. I like writing though. I love writing, and I'm just starting up again after a little while of not writing, and but Yeah, it's I think I do think writing all the time is the way to get good at writing. That helps. And but I think writing for a purpose is also helpful too,
Sure, sure.
for me.
Yeah. Um, I was curious to ask you about. I saw an interview with you recently where you said that you weren't that into transcribing other
Yeah.
people's stuff note for note,
Mhm.
and I really believe that because your playing and your writing both are very singular,
Mm. Thank you.
and yeah, and so I wonder, like, at what point did you start to find stuff on the guitar that felt where you felt like, oh yeah, that's me. That lick, that's
Mm.
my language. That chord, that kind of phrasing, that's my stuff. When did you start to find those things?
Interesting question. That's really good. I like that. Um, I don't know. I don't know if I've ever felt that way, to be honest. Um, Probably because I don't have as much of a um backdrop of other people's stuff. It's not like I've been playing this person's thing and now I got to find something of my own. I think I looked at um I was always into theory as a kid and learning scales and kind of like the fundamentals, so to speak, so that if I was working on scales or modes or this or that, and then I heard a soloist play within them and have their own identity, I could hear, oh, they're using this part of that scale, or they're you know what I mean? Like we're all drinking from the same water, and that's what they're doing with it. Isn't that cool?
Right.
And so I always felt like yeah, it's just whatever, you can't help but do what you're gonna do with the materials and therefore kind of have a singular thing. And I don't mean just for myself, I even mean as a teacher with students, I've yet to hear anybody not sound like themselves. I really have never. I've never heard someone where I'm like, wait, but you're you, and this sounds like, I'm like, well, that
Yeah.
sounds like you. It sounds like, and what we're hearing often is in my opinion, is priorities. We have this hierarchy of, well, um, to this player, um, these things matter. This is first and foremost, it's content, or first and foremost, it's touch, or first and foremost, it's drama, or first and foremost, it's listening, and you kind of, depending on where a player's priorities are, I think it frames the content very differently. It's like and that's you can like what's the pursuit is really the question. So I would say
Mm.
I think I think I've always felt like, well, I have a pursuit, I have an agenda, and therefore you're going to hear it whether I want, and sometimes I don't want you to hear it, but I do. There is something I'm interested in or hunting down.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. It's really interesting to me that while you're not sitting around, transcribing other people's lines, you really pay a deep kind of attention, to
Mhm.
music. When I hear you talk about music, the things that you notice in other people's sounds or writing or recordings, like you mentioned architecture before, and just it's a I know like some students I have, they're like, oh, I really want to work on my ear training. I want to, can I develop a perfect pitch? I want to, but like there's a different kind of ear training, a really deep listening practice that seems very at the core of you as a musician, as an artist. I wonder how you've cultivated that.
It's an interest. I appreciate you framing it that way, and I think you're right. I think sometimes, I don't know if it's siloed or these skill sets of observation and awareness and ability and acquisition of knowledge. All these things, they're often separated in educational models. There's a time for acquiring, there's a time for presenting, there's a time for refining your ear. And my father was an amazing uh kind of he possessed an amazing ability to break things down in disciplines that maybe weren't even his forte. You know, it could be
Hmm.
he could kind of there was no sense of like, well, I guess I'm not I need a certain amount of training before I'm allowed to comment on what makes this work. It could be anything. And he would look at it, and my mother possesses the same thing, but that's where anything I possess like that comes from them, obviously. But it's this kind of permission to break things down, to look at things for what they are. Um, and it's funny because I think sometimes that's relegated to a deeper place, and I think that's almost what um, gets in the way. That like you will earn the right to have an opinion, you will earn the right to have a say in why you think something's working or not. And you see that in jazz a lot. I mean, there's so much music I remember as a jazz student listening to that I didn't like, but I thought almost thought the point wasn't for me to like it. It was to know how it worked, you know? And then years later, I thought, well, that's kind of it's a form of self-abuse because often being drawn to something or being pushed away from something is a very human response. And to say, I love this, and that's what drives the engine of making me want to understand why this works. And they seem to go up here and they seem to go down there. And when I feel this feeling, they seem to be doing that. And when I feel this feeling, they seem to be not doing any of that. You know, that kind of stuff is fueled so well when it's driven by when you feel like you have permission to almost like make up like a response to it,
Hmm.
to not suppress your response to it. And I think I don't think this is novel at all. It's almost like being aware from the point of view of a fan rather than from the point of view of a practitioner.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, there's how many times have you had this experience? Or I mean, at least I won't project, but I have where um, I'll hear something and I'll show it to Margaret, my wife and partner. She's amazing at this. She can look at things as a fan and a masterful musician, but she'll hear something and I'll say, well, I can't tell if I like it because this is this and they do that and blah blah blah. And she'll just be like, it's terrible. And I'll be like, yeah, that's the word I was going for, you know? And it's not to be mean, it's not at all that, or it's amazing. The point is that your gut knows until you can also analyze with your gut, you know. You don't have to leave. I think um I did all those things you're talking about with your students. If I want my ears to be better, so I'm going to study ear training, and I would do it, and it was great. And I would study ear training, and it helped. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure it spoke to my um, emotional response to music. And I think when there's an emotional response, we often acquire it where we connect to it in a deeper way. And that's all I could hope for out of practicing is to really connect with something wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm.
I just want to ask you just one more question. I know you're going back out on the road. You said this week with that's with your trio, right?
I'll be with, yeah, Dave and Jorge.
And so, do you have to think differently about your set list? Are you going to feature less of the Speak to Me music, or are you still going to play whatever you want to play? Like, does it change when you don't have the Rob Berger and Levon
Yeah.
Henry with you?
It does change. Oh, I mean, largely because we've played so much together as a trio in that way. So there's a certain homecoming aspect, you know. But we'll be playing a lot of this music. Lately, I've been playing around with no set list and just kind of you do just start playing. And we all at this point, especially with Dave and Jorge, we have a lot of music we could start playing at any given moment. I tend to be more conservative about it and say, well, yeah, but we need an opener and we need a closer and that's fine. But lately, I just don't really want to do that as much. I was talking, Joey Barron was helpful, and we were talking. I know you were playing with him a lot too and recording,
Yeah.
and he's responsible for pushing me the most in that direction of being like, you don't need a set list. Sure. And we were out playing some shows, Joey, me, and Jorge, and I was like, okay. And I didn't have a set list, and it was the most enjoyable thing because it was really it became like, well, what if we played this old tune I haven't thought of in a while? And what about this one that we only played once? What about the and where it just became a real experience. So all that to say that with the trio, um, I'm excited to just play some music. I
Mm.
don't whatever the room and the night asks of us, that's what we need to be privy to.
Wow, so beautiful.
Oh, thanks, Annie.